Since mid-April, Hungarian authorities have begun mailing ballots to citizens. The form contains a single question: do you support Ukraine joining the European Union? All adult Hungarians are to receive the ballot and a return envelope by the end of May. Prime Minister Viktor Orban has already taken part in the survey, publicly voting no. The marked no box was visible in a photo the Prime Minister posted on social media.
Our opponents, the Brussels bureaucrats and their domestic agents, are doing everything they can to push Ukraine into the EU. The question is whether we can stop this and whether we can protect the Hungarian people from the dangers this brings. Only the Hungarian people can decide Hungary's fate.
During the referendum, Hungarian authorities intensified their anti-Ukrainian media campaign and ramped up fear tactics. A list of alleged threats believed to come with Ukraine's EU accession was published as part of the campaign.
The threat is enormous. Ukrainians will soon flood the job market. Jobs and wages will be at risk. Weapons, organized crime and drug trafficking are also concerns. And all the EU funds that we, Hungary, are supposed to receive will go to Ukraine. Tamás Mendzser, Fidesz party spokesperson on Facebook.
Hungarian opposition party TISA organized an alternative poll called The Nation's Voice. According to party vice president Mark Radnai, more than 1.1 million Hungarians participated. One of the questions addressed Ukraine's potential EU membership. More than 58% of respondents voted in favor.
In the event of an election victory, the results of this poll will become a cornerstone of Tisha's policy. The future Tisha government commits itself, knowing the exact conditions when this issue will actually need to be resolved, to hold a legally decisive referendum on the issue of Ukraine's integration in the EU and to present its result.
Hungary is not just blocking Ukraine's EU membership bid. In recent months, Budapest has regularly vetoed Brussels' decisions. On March 6th, during an emergency European Council session, Prime Minister Orban refused to sign a joint communiqué supporting Ukraine, effectively blocking its adoption. The statements about Ukraine had to be issued in a separate document, signed by 26 of 27 EU leaders. Hungary also delayed the renewal of EU sanctions against Russia, only agreeing to unblock the decision in exchange for concessions from Brussels. If Budapest follows through on its threats to oppose future sanctions, the broader EU and G7 could be significantly affected.
Blocking the renewal of EU sanctions would leave G7 and EU governments on the hook for multi-billion euro loans made to Kyiv that were backed by Russian assets. The EU and G7 last year used profits rising from about 260 billion euros of frozen assets worldwide to underpin a 50 billion euros loan to Ukraine. If the assets are unfrozen, the EU and the US would each be liable for 20 billion euros of the loan, while the rest would fall on other G7 members. From Financial Times, citing the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Estonia, Margus Tsahkna.
The European Commission is now working on a contingency plan in case sanctions renewal fails, or if Budapest blocks the EU's 17th sanctions package. There's also growing discussion within the bloc about potentially suspending Hungary's voting rights.
The idea remains at an early stage, but informed insiders think it will never happen because rescinding voting rights requires the anonymity of the remaining 26 members. Some think a reckoning will come if Hungary seeks to veto the extension of sanctions against Russia, including the freezing of 210 billion euros of Russian central bank assets held in the bloc, from The Guardian publication.
Article 7 of the Lisbon Treaty, effectively the EU's constitutional framework, does allow for a member state to lose its voting rights. But there's also another way to bypass Hungary's repeated vetoes. Currently, the EU operates on the principle of unanimity, meaning a single no vote can block collective decisions. According to several Western media outlets, the EU is now considering a shift toward majority voting instead. Reported by Valeria Nekipolova, UATV News.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
The global order is shifting more deeply than at any time since the Cold War ended, said European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. According to Politico, in recent weeks she has held talks with leaders from Iceland, New Zealand, Malaysia, the Philippines, Canada, India, and the United Arab Emirates. The trade war declared by U.S. President Donald Trump in April this year is pushing many countries to seek new and reliable partners, and the European Union may play a central role.
In a more and more unpredictable global environment, countries are lining up to work with us. In the middle of the chaos, Europe stands firm, grounded in values, ready to shape what comes next. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, in an interview with Politico.
This intensifying dialogue between the EU and international partners is a direct result of President Trump's decision to impose tariffs on goods from over 180 countries. Most of the affected nations are facing tariffs ranging from 10% to 54%, while China is being hit with a steep 145% rate. In response, Beijing has vowed to retaliate in kind. Meanwhile, the European Union has opted for a 90-day pause before introducing its own 25% counter tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum, a reaction to Washington's April 9th move to temporarily suspend a 20% duty on all goods from the EU.
The European Commission is working on its offer for trade negotiations with the United States to attempt to avoid Trump's planned tariffs, with both sides signaling that energy could form part of a broader trade deal. Trump has said several times the EU should buy more American oil and gas to lower its trade surplus with the United States. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said the EU could increase US LNG purchases as the bloc seeks to quit Russian gas by 2027, writes Reuters.
One potential element of an EU-US trade deal includes changes to the EU's methane emission rules. According to Reuters, this could involve the introduction of technical adjustments that would allow US gas exporters to formally meet European environmental standards. Amid the tariff offensive from the Trump administration, EU member states, along with countries like China, are exploring ways to manage the fallout. For instance, in late July 2025, Hong Kong will host the 50th EU Summit. Earlier, the EU and China agreed to discuss the introduction of minimum pricing for Chinese-made electric vehicles.
The EU increased tariffs on Chinese-built EVs to as much as 45.3% last October, but Brussels and Beijing have floated the idea of lifting the tariffs through possible commitments to minimum prices, known as price undertakings for imported cars, writes Reuters.
According to the latest projections, the U.S. GDP could shrink by up to 1.4% by 2027 due to the impact of the new tariffs. The EU economy, in contrast, is expected to see a much smaller decline of about 0.2%. Japanese economist Shozaburo Sakai is also confident the U.S. tariffs will ultimately hurt the American economy itself.
US tariffs will inevitably backfire on every country and ultimately on the United States itself. This presents a very serious challenge to US GDP growth. The tariffs will trigger sharp price increases, worsening the US economic outlook. Moreover, with fixed purchasing power, any cost increase will naturally lead to reduced consumption. Simply put, goods won't sell. As a result, prices will rise, but products will remain on the shelves.
U.S. tariffs risk damaging the global economy, which is why the European Union is committed to avoiding such a negative scenario, said EU Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis earlier. Reported by Yulia Hrnovska, UATV News.
Reuters has published the text of a document allegedly presented by Steve Witkoff to delegations of European countries on a peaceful settlement in Ukraine. According to the document, Ukraine will receive security guarantees from a group of European states and willing non-European countries. In this case, Ukraine must refuse to join NATO, but can seek to join the EU. The text also states that the US de jure recognizes Russian control over the occupied Crimea. This is precisely the recognition by the US, not Ukraine. The document also states that the US recognizes de facto Russian control over the Luhansk region and the parts of the Kherson, Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions of Ukraine currently under Russian control. Russian President Vladimir Putin is receiving US President Donald Trump's special envoy Stephen Witkoff at the Kremlin. This is their fourth personal meeting since February of this year. US President Donald Trump says that his administration seeks a ceasefire in Ukraine and a peace agreement as soon as possible and is conducting negotiations with both Russia and Ukraine to this end. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte said that Russia remains a long-term threat to the alliance. Asked about a possible peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, Rutte said that something is on the table, adding that the ball is now in Russia's court. He added that despite knowing Putin, he had long ago stopped trying to understand what is in his mind.